The parking lot of Henderson Mall in Dallas was already buzzing with the morning rush. The sun glared against the polished windows, and the air carried the smell of coffee and impatience. Sarah Miller hurried across the asphalt, her worn heels tapping nervously against the concrete. In her hand, she clutched a small paper bag with a sandwich, her breakfast, her lunch, and maybe her dinner, depending on how the day went. Inside the store, the atmosphere was sharp, metallic, one of those places where smiles are part of the uniform, but not of the heart. Sarah adjusted her badge and headed toward the electronics section. Her manager, Lindsay, was already there, perfectly dressed, voice cold as glass. "Sarah, you're late again," Lindsay said without even looking up from the tablet. Sarah lowered her head. "I know, I'm sorry, the bus was delayed. Excuses, always excuses." She sighed theatrically. I need reliability, not drama." Around them, the other employees pretended not to listen. They always did. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she walked to her workstation. She kept her head down and her hands steady, arranging the security cameras on display, connecting cables, testing screens, her routine, her refuge. For most people, these were just cameras. For Sarah, they were something more, a kind of quiet poetry. They captured everything without judgment, saw truth in silence. Maybe that's why she loved her job so much. But that morning, something would break the fragile rhythm of her days. A sudden alarm echoed through the speakers. Lindsay's voice cut through the air. "Everyone, please come to the break room right now." Sarah frowned and followed the others. When she entered, her stomach dropped. On the big screen, a paused image, a woman's hand slipping a jewelry box into her bag. Lindsay stood beside the TV, arms crossed. "We had a theft yesterday, and thanks to the footage, we found our culprit." She pressed play. The image moved. The woman's face turned toward the camera. It was Sarah. A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "I knew it." Sarah froze, her body rigid, her breath trapped between disbelief and fear. "That's not me," she said, her voice trembling. Lindsay smirked. "The footage doesn't lie." "Dean, it's a mistake. I would never—" "Save it. Security already reviewed it. You're suspended until further notice." Sarah looked around. No one defended her. Not a single word, only silence. She wanted to scream, to tear through the lie, but all she could manage was a whisper. "Please, you have to believe me." Lindsay folded her arms. "I believed you once. That was my mistake." 2 security guards escorted her to the exit. Every step felt like a blade. Outside, the wind was cold, but her face burned with shame. In her reflection on the glass door, she didn't see herself anymore, only a shadow of who she used to be. Sarah sat on the curb, her hands shaking. Around her, people passed by without noticing. The world kept moving, indifferent. She stared at her own reflection in the puddle near her shoes and whispered, "The truth doesn't disappear. I'll prove it." The next morning, Dallas woke up to a grey sky, heavy and humid. Sarah barely slept. The images from the store looped in her mind like a punishment she couldn't escape. She sat at the small kitchen table, staring at her cold coffee. Her daughter, Emily, 8 years old, came out of the bedroom rubbing her eyes. "Mom, why aren't you dressed for work?" Sarah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mum's taking a few days off, sweetheart." Emily frowned. "Did you get sick?" "No, just tired." The little girl nodded, trusting her mother's half-truth. Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear and tried to hide the tremor in her hands. She couldn't let her daughter see the storm that was devouring her from inside. When Emily left for school, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. The apartment felt colder than usual. Bills scattered on the counter, the rent notice on the fridge. Everything reminded her of how fragile her life had become. She opened her laptop and went through every message she'd received from work. At the bottom of one email was an attachment, a system notification that no one else had probably noticed. It was an automatic backup from the store's security cameras, saved before the footage had been reviewed. Sarah's pulse quickened. She clicked it open. The video started. She fast-forwarded to the timestamp from the day of the incident. The corridor appeared, dim, empty, then someone walked by. Not her. Different height, different posture. Then suddenly the image glitched for 3 seconds. When it came back, the box was already in the bag. 3 seconds erased. 3 seconds that ruined her life. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filled with tears, not just of pain, but of revelation. Someone had tampered with the footage. Determined, she grabbed her coat and left the apartment. The wind outside was biting. She took the bus downtown toward the Henderson Mall. Every stop felt like a lifetime. When she finally reached the main entrance, 2 security guards blocked her path. "Miss Miller, you're not allowed inside." "Please, I just need to speak with Mark, the store manager." "I'm sorry, we have orders." Sarah's voice broke. "You don't understand. I can prove I didn't do it." The younger guard hesitated. He looked at her face, pale, desperate, yet strangely calm. Finally, he said quietly, "He's in his office. I can tell him you're here, but that's all." Sarah nodded, clutching her bag tightly. Minutes later, Mark appeared in the corridor. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes. "Sarah, you shouldn't have come." "Mark, please, I have something to show you." "I can't. The company already decided." "Then let me show you as a friend." The sincerity in her voice disarmed him. He sighed. 5 minutes, that's all." They walked to a side office. Sarah took out a small flash drive from her pocket. "This is a system backup. The real one, not the edited footage. Watch." Mark hesitated, then connected it to the monitor. The video played. The same corridor, the same bag. But this time, it showed something new. A shadow entering the frame, crouching near her locker. The figure's face wasn't clear, but it wasn't hers. Mark froze. "Where did you get this?" "It was automatically uploaded before someone changed the logs. The original file was hidden." He stared at the screen, conflicted. If this is true, then someone inside... "Someone wanted me gone," Sarah finished, her voice steady. Mark swallowed hard. "Sarah, this is serious. If corporate finds out..." "They will," she interrupted, "because I'm not hiding anymore." When she stepped back out into the parking lot, the clouds had darkened. Thunder rolled in the distance. Sarah zipped her jacket and whispered to herself, "They tried to erase me, but I'll make sure the truth can't be deleted." The wind picked up cold and sharp. In her eyes, there was no fear anymore, only determination. And somewhere in that heavy Texas sky, it felt as if destiny itself was watching, waiting to see what she would do next. By the next morning, the gossip had already spread through the mall, like wildfire. In the break room, whispers turned into laughter, and glances turned into daggers. Sarah had become the story of the week, the woman who got caught and still had the nerve to show her face. She walked through the corridor of the Henderson Mall with her head held low. The sound of her footsteps seemed louder than ever. Every corner echoed with murmurs that stung like tiny needles. "That's her. I heard she tried to blame someone else. People like that never learn." Sarah kept walking, forcing herself not to react. Each breath felt heavy, but she refused to let them see her break. Still, the looks, the smirks, the raised eyebrows cut deeper than any words. At the electronics counter, Brian, one of her former co-workers, leaned against the display case, pretending to clean it. "Hey, Sarah," he said loudly, just enough for everyone to hear. "You here to steal a few cameras this time?" The others laughed. Sarah stopped, looked at him, and said softly, "I came to get what's mine. My dignity." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Brian scoffed. "You can't download that, sweetheart." Sarah turned away. Inside, her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed calm. She'd learned that silence could be stronger than shouting, and that the truth, when carried quietly, terrified those who lived by lies. Later that afternoon, she waited outside the building for Mark. The rain had started, slow, steady, relentless. When he finally appeared, holding his umbrella, she called out, Mark! He hesitated, looked around, then approached. Sarah, you shouldn't be here. You're only making things harder. For who? Me or for the people afraid I'll prove them wrong? He sighed. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Corporate wants this to disappear. Sarah stepped closer. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. And what do you want, Mark? He didn't answer. Only the sound of rain filled the silence between them. Sarah nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Then she turned and walked away, her figure shrinking in the grey drizzle. Behind her, Mark lowered his umbrella and whispered to himself, God help me, she might be right. That night, Sarah returned home drenched. Emily was waiting by the window. Mum, why are you all wet? Sarah forced a smile. Just rain, sweetheart. The little girl looked up, curious. Are people still being mean to you? Sarah froze, surprised by the question. Who told you that? You talk in your sleep sometimes. Sarah knelt down, brushing her daughter's hair back gently. People can be cruel when they're scared, Emily, but being kind, that's what makes us different. The child hugged her tightly. You're not scared, right, Mum? Sarah closed her eyes. I used to be, but not anymore. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table again, laptop open. She replayed the footage from her flash drive frame by frame, analyzing every second. Then she froze. There, in the reflection of the glass display case, was a faint silhouette, the curve of a shoulder, the way the person moved. It wasn't clear, but something about it felt familiar. She zoomed in. A necklace, a small gold necklace in the shape of a star. Only one person in the store wore that, Lindsay, her manager. Sarah's chest tightened. Her instincts screamed what her heart already knew. Someone had set her up. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the dark screen. Outside, thunder rolled again. It was the same storm as before, but now she wasn't the same woman. She whispered to herself, You wanted to see me break, but all you did was wake me up. As the next day dawned with a heavy sky and a restless wind. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection as if facing a stranger. Her eyes were swollen, her shoulders tense. But something inside had shifted, a quiet, determined fire that no humiliation could extinguish. She dressed simply, jeans, a grey sweater, and her old work shoes. Before leaving, she glanced at the table where her laptop still rested, open to the paused video frame, the reflection, the necklace, the proof. She plugged the flash drive into her pocket and whispered to herself, It's time. When she arrived at Henderson Mall, the morning crowd was already moving in and out of stores. She didn't go inside, not yet. Instead, she crossed the parking lot and entered the small cafe across the street, where Ben, the owner, was setting up tables. Ben was in his 50s, kind eyes, hands rough from years of work. He had always treated her with respect, one of the few who still did. Sarah, he said, surprised. You look like you've seen a ghost. She smiled faintly. Not a ghost, the truth. They sat at the counter. She told him everything, the video, the reflection, the necklace. Ben listened quietly, his brow furrowing deeper with every detail. When she finished, he crossed his arms. So, your own manager set you up. Looks that way. What are you gonna do? Sarah looked out the window toward the mall. Prove it. The cameras don't just record, they remember. Ben nodded slowly. You always were too sharp for them, Sarah, she smirked. Not sharp enough to see this coming. He poured her a cup of coffee and said quietly, Sometimes the ones who fall hardest are the ones meant to teach the rest how to stand back up. She looked at him and smiled, truly smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe this time I'll make it count. Boy. That afternoon, Sarah waited near the service entrance until she saw one of the janitors she used to work with, David. He was carrying boxes to the back. David, can I ask you for a favor? He looked startled. Sarah, you're not supposed to be here. I know. I just need 5 minutes. She handed him a small envelope with some money inside. Please, I just need the access code to the camera archives. He hesitated. If they find out, they won't. And if they do, I'll take the blame. David sighed, then scribbled something on a napkin and handed it to her. Be quick. That night, Sarah returned after closing hours. The rain had stopped, and the empty mall echoed like a cathedral of silence. She wore a hooded jacket and moved carefully through the shadows until she reached the small maintenance door that led to the control room. The access code worked. The electronic lock clicked open, and the door creaked as she pushed it gently. Rows of monitors flickered in the dark, screens showing empty corridors and storage rooms. She connected her flash drive, heart pounding, and began to search. File after file, she scrolled through the recordings. Then, there it was, footage from the same day as her accusation, from a different angle. It showed Lindsay entering the storage area minutes before Sarah arrived. The timestamp matched perfectly. Sarah pressed pause and stared at the frozen image. Her hands trembled. She wasn't imagining it. It was real. She exported the file and backed it up twice. The entire time her breathing was shallow, her chest tight. Every sound, the hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of a clock, felt deafening. She knew what this meant. This wasn't just about her job anymore. This was about dignity. When the file finished saving, Sarah removed the drive and slipped it into her pocket. She turned off the monitor lights, closed the door behind her, and stepped out into the empty corridor. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. She looked up at the dark sky, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "You wanted a thief. Fine. I'm stealing my life back." And as she walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the distance. Not in shame this time, but in quiet, unstoppable defiance. Udi Fighter Dawn broke slowly over Dallas, painting the sky in orange and pale gold. Sarah hadn't slept. She spent the entire night sitting at her kitchen table, watching the footage on repeat. The image of Lindsay slipping the jewelry box into her locker burned in her mind. She had the truth in her hands, but fear still clung to her like a shadow. Until she looked over at Emily, still sleeping peacefully in her bed, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. That sight gave her strength. She left a note on the table before heading out. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart. Mummy's going to fix everything." Then she took a deep breath, grabbed her flash drive, and stepped out into the morning light. By the time she arrived at Henderson Mall, the parking lot was already full. The sun was climbing, and the hum of daily life filled the air again. Cars, chatter, the faint echo of music from nearby stores. Sarah stood by the entrance, her heart pounding. The same security guard from before saw her and crossed his arms. "Ma'am, I told you. You're not allowed inside." She met his gaze calmly. "Call the manager, please. It's important." The guard hesitated. Something in her voice, steady, unwavering, made him pick up his radio. Moments later, Mark appeared at the end of the corridor. When he saw her, his face tightened with a mix of surprise and unease. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here." "I know, but I have something you need to see." He looked around nervously. "Fine. 5 minutes. Come on." They walked through a side door into a small office. Inside, Lindsay was at the desk, reviewing papers. When she saw Sarah, her eyes went wide. "What is she doing here?" Mark replied firmly. "I let her in. She says she has something to show us." Sarah pulled the flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the desk. "Everything's here. The full recording from that night." Lindsay rolled her eyes, forcing a laugh. "Oh, please, this again. Are you really still playing the victim?" Sarah didn't flinch. "Just watch." Mark connected the flash drive to the computer. The monitor lit up. The video began to play. First, the empty corridor. Then, a figure entering the frame. Lindsay, slipping the jewelry box into Sarah's locker, then walking away quickly. The room went silent. The sound of the air conditioner filled the space. Mark took a step back. "Lindsay, what is this?" Her face went pale. "It's fake! She edited that footage." Sarah folded her arms. "I found the original file on the store's backup server, the missing 3 minutes that no one could explain. Here they are." Lindsay's voice shook. "That doesn't prove anything." Mark's tone hardened. It proved someone tried to frame her. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Lindsay's lips trembled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to get me fired, Sarah interrupted. The other woman looked down. Mark turned away, rubbing his forehead. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but her voice stayed steady. Sorry doesn't erase what you all let happen. Outside, employees had started to gather near the glass wall, whispering. Some pressed closer, trying to see inside. The rumor spread fast. Sarah's back. She has proof. She wasn't the thief. Mark picked up the phone. I'm calling the legal department. This needs to be documented. Do what you have to, Sarah said quietly. I just want my truth back. Lindsay stood frozen, her voice barely a whisper. I was scared of losing my position. I thought if I pointed at someone else, they'd see me as loyal. Sarah looked at her, not with hatred, but with something sadder. You destroyed a life because you were afraid. And fear, Lindsay. Fear steals more than anything else. Mark took a deep breath. You're getting your job back, Sarah. And more than that, I want you to help us rebuild our security system. No one knows it better than you. She blinked, surprised. You're offering me a job? No, he said softly. I'm asking for your help. When Sarah stepped back into the hallway, the employees fell silent. Then, slowly, one of them, Ben from the cafe, smiled at her. Knew you weren't the kind to give up. For the first time in months, Sarah smiled back. A small, tired smile, but real. She felt the weight lift just a little. The whispers that once mocked her now followed with quiet respect. She walked toward the exit, the flash drive still in her hand. Through the glass doors, the noon sunlight poured in, warm and bright. For the first time since it all began, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not victory. Not vengeance. Just peace. The kind that comes when the truth finally breathes again. Decidissim, the days that followed were quieter, at least on the surface. The tension that once clung to every corner of Henderson Mall had started to fade. People nodded politely when Sarah walked by. Some even smiled, though most avoided her gaze. Respect, she'd learned, often came wrapped in guilt. She had been officially reinstated. Mark gave her full control over revising the store's security systems, a gesture of trust and maybe redemption for his silence. Sarah accepted. But more than rebuilding cameras and wiring, she was rebuilding herself. Every morning she walked through the mall's bright corridors, and every sound, the clicking of heels, the hum of fluorescent lights, reminded her that she had survived, that she was still standing. But not everyone was ready to move on. That afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing footage from the new system, she heard raised voices in the hallway. She recognized one of them immediately. Lindsay. You can't just suspend me indefinitely. Lindsay's voice cracked through the air. A staff member from HR tried to calm her down. The board made its decision, Lindsay. You'll be on leave until further notice. Sarah listened quietly, unseen. Part of her wanted to walk out there, to remind Lindsay of everything she'd done, to make her feel, just for a moment, the humiliation she'd caused. But she didn't move. She stayed still, watching the reflection of the argument in the glass door. When Lindsay finally stormed past the office, Sarah called out softly, "Lindsay!" The woman froze, turned slowly. "What do you want?" "To say I'm sorry that you're hurting," Sarah said calmly. Lindsay frowned, confused. "You're sorry? After everything?" "No one wins when fear makes the decisions." Lindsay's lips trembled. "You're a better person than me." Sarah shook her head. "No, I just learned that forgiveness frees the one who gives it, not the one who gets it." Lindsay didn't reply. She left quietly, her arrogance finally replaced by something that looked like regret. Sarah exhaled, and in that breath, something inside her began to heal. Hours later, the sudden blare of an alarm shattered the calm. A red light flashed on the control room wall. Fire alarm. Sarah jumped to her feet. Mark's voice came through the intercom. "All employees, evacuate immediately. Fire reported in the storage area." She ran toward the main corridor. The smell of smoke hit her instantly. People were rushing out in panic. The crowd pressed toward the exits, shouting. In the chaos, someone yelled, "There's still a girl trapped in the stockroom." Sarah froze. "Who?" "One of the new cashiers. She's stuck behind the boxes," shouted David, the janitor. Without a word, Sarah ran in the opposite direction, straight into the smoke. Mark saw her and grabbed her arm. "Sarah, stop! It's too dangerous!" "I know what I'm doing," she shouted back. The corridor near the storage area was choked with grey haze. Heat rolled down the walls. Sarah covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed forward, eyes stinging, coughing through the acrid air. "Hello, can you hear me?" she called out. A weak voice answered from the dark. "Help! I can't move!" Sarah followed the sound, climbing over fallen boxes. There, a young woman pinned under a collapsed metal shelf. Sarah knelt beside her. "You're going to be okay. I've got you." She pushed, strained, shifted one box at a time. Her hands were trembling, her lungs burning, but she didn't stop. With one final pull, she freed the girl's leg. "Come on! Lean on me!" Together they stumbled toward the exit. The fire alarms wailed. The sprinklers sputtered, misting the smoke. Through the haze, Sarah saw Mark and 2 security guards running toward them. "Over here!" she shouted. They reached her, taking the girl from her arms and carrying her outside. When Sarah stepped into the open air, the crowd erupted in relief. She dropped to her knees on the pavement, coughing, gasping for breath. Mark knelt beside her. "You saved her, Sarah." She shook her head. "Anyone would have done it." He looked at her, eyes full of something between awe and disbelief. "No, not anyone." The fire trucks arrived. The smoke curled upward into the fading Texas sky. Sarah stared at it, chest heaving. Ironically, the cause of the fire, as the firefighters soon discovered, was a short circuit in one of the old security cameras, the very system she'd been called back to repair. Life's cruel poetry, she thought. Sometimes the same thing that exposes truth can also burn you. As she stood watching the flames die, Ben appeared from the crowd, still in his cafe apron. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Sarah. Real good." She smiled faintly, exhausted. "I didn't want to be remembered as the woman who was humiliated." Ben nodded. "You won't be. People will remember the woman who ran into the fire." Sarah looked up at the grey sky. The last wisps of smoke rose into the light, and for the first time she didn't see ruin. She saw renewal. She reached into her pocket and felt the small silver keychain Emily had given her. It glinted faintly, engraved with the words, "You always see the truth." And in that moment, Sarah understood. Seeing the truth wasn't just about catching lies. It was about recognizing the light inside yourself and refusing to let the world extinguish it. 2 days after the fire, the smell of smoke still lingered in the hallways of Henderson Mall. Parts of the ceiling were covered with temporary panels. Electricians worked quietly, trying to erase the marks of what had happened. But no repair could erase what people now felt for Sarah Miller. To most, she was no longer the woman accused. She was the woman who ran into the fire. Mark gave her a new role, official supervisor of all safety and monitoring systems. She now had her own small office, a corner of glass and cables where she spent hours reviewing footage and setting up the new network. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. But peace never lasts long for those who know the truth. That morning, a black sedan parked in front of the mall. From it stepped a man in a tailored suit, briefcase in hand, his expression hard and impatient. Richard Coleman, corporate lawyer, the same one who had handled her case months earlier. He went straight to Mark's office. Sarah noticed the shift in the atmosphere the moment he arrived. Employees lowered their voices. Doors closed quietly. Something was coming. Moments later, Mark called her in. When she entered, Richard was already seated at the desk, fingers steepled. "Miss Miller," he began coldly, "we've received the official report on the fire." Sarah nodded. "I read it. It says it started in the old wiring system." Richard smiled thinly. "More specifically, in the cameras you installed when you worked here years ago." The air left the room. Sarah blinked. "That's not true." The old cameras were replaced. Not all of them. And the company needs someone responsible for this failure. Mark stood up immediately. That's unfair, Richard. You know she... What I know, Richard interrupted, is that the media is already asking who's to blame, and the board wants a name before this turns into a lawsuit. Sarah stared at him, feeling the familiar sting of injustice. She'd lived this scene before, the quiet betrayal behind polite words. Her pulse quickened, but her voice stayed calm. You're trying to make me your scapegoat, Richard leaned back. No, Miss Miller, I'm trying to protect the company. She met his eyes. At the cost of the truth. He smiled again coldly. The truth doesn't pay damages. Mark slammed his hand on the table. Enough! Sarah's not taking the fall again. Richard looked at him unimpressed. That's not your decision. The board meeting is tomorrow. Think carefully about your position, Mark. Sarah left the office without another word. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. History was trying to repeat itself, and this time she would not let it. And that night, in her small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders and files. She combed through every maintenance report, every invoice, every system log. After hours of searching, she found it, a document signed months before the fire, authorizing a cheaper replacement for the security wiring. And the signature belonged to none other than Lindsay. The subcontractor's name was visible too, Coleman Technical Partners. Her blood ran cold. Richard Coleman hadn't just been the lawyer. He owned the maintenance company that had installed the faulty cables. Sarah stared at the page, a mix of rage and disbelief building in her chest. You buried the truth once, she whispered. Not again. She picked up the phone and called Mark. I found something. You need to see this, now. In days, 30 minutes later, they met in the dimly lit security room. Sarah spread the documents across the desk. Mark leaned in, reading each line, his jaw tightening. This proves the cables weren't the ones you installed, and that he authorized the replacements himself. She met his eyes. We have to take this to the board. Mark hesitated. Sarah, if we expose him, it'll bring down half the company. Then let it fall. It's built on lies. He looked at her, torn between loyalty and fear. They'll come after you again. She shook her head. Let them. I'm not the same woman who walked out of here in tears. The next morning, she arrived at corporate headquarters in downtown Dallas. The lobby was grand, glass walls, marble floors, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. But Sarah walked straight ahead, head high, flash drive in hand. The boardroom was full. Executives, lawyers, Richard at the far end of the table. He smiled as she entered, confident. Mark stood near the corner, visibly tense. Richard began smoothly. Miss Miller, I appreciate your coming. This meeting concerns the source of the fire. Please have a seat. Sarah didn't sit. She placed the flash drive on the table. Before you decide who's responsible, you should see this. She connected it to the projector. The screen lit up with copies of the maintenance orders, names, dates, signatures, and there, clearly visible, Richard Coleman's authorization for the substandard wiring. The room went still. One of the senior board members, an older man named Harrison, leaned forward. Is this real? Every file has a verified timestamp, Sarah replied. The fire started because of those cables, not my work. Mark stepped forward. She's telling the truth. Richard's calm facade cracked. This is outrageous. These documents are stolen property. Sarah looked him dead in the eye. No, Richard, they're evidence. Harrison turned to the board. I think we've heard enough. Mr. Coleman, your services are no longer required. Richard's face went pale. He gathered his papers, avoiding Sarah's gaze, and left without a word. When the door closed, the silence felt holy. Sarah exhaled slowly, her heart still pounding. Harrison looked at her. You've shown more courage than most people I've met in this room. As she left the building, the sun was rising over the Dallas skyline. She paused on the sidewalk, looking at her reflection in the glass wall. The same woman, but different eyes. Eyes that no longer feared lies, power, or silence. Sarah whispered to herself, No one steals the truth from those who refuse to surrender it. Do you that night, after the board meeting, Sarah didn't go straight home. She wandered through the quiet streets of downtown Dallas, her footsteps echoing softly against the wet pavement. The city lights shimmered in puddles left by an earlier rain, breaking into small, trembling reflections. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting anyone. No one doubted her. No one accused her. And yet, she didn't feel peace. Victory, she realized, could be lonely too. She stopped in front of a small diner glowing faintly in the dark, one of those places that never closed, always smelling of coffee and second chances. Inside, the hum of a jukebox mixed with the clinking of plates. Sarah sat by the window and ordered black coffee. The waitress, a woman with tired but kind eyes, looked at her gently. "Long day?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Long year." The waitress nodded, understanding more than she said, and left her alone. Sarah stared at the steam rising from her cup. In the glass, she saw her own reflection, older, sharper, but not unkind. And just like that, memory pulled her backward. Not to the store, not to the cameras, but to a small apartment in Fort Worth, 10 years earlier. Flashback, 10 years earlier. A dim room filled with the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. Sarah sat beside a hospital bed, her hand wrapped around the hand of a man, her husband, Daniel. The oxygen machine hissed quietly beside them. Daniel was thin, pale, but his eyes still had that soft warmth that made her believe everything would be okay. "You should rest," he whispered. "Not until you take your meds," she said softly. He smiled. "You always worry too much, and you never enough." He chuckled weakly, the sound turning into a cough. Sarah reached out, adjusting his blanket, blinking away tears. "The insurance said they won't cover the new treatment," she murmured. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. "We'll find a way. We always do. I don't have the money, Dan. I called every hospital, every charity. I even thought about selling." He pressed her hand, gently but firmly. "No, you've done enough. You've always done enough." He turned to her, eyes full of calm. "Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let this world make you hard." Her lips trembled. "Don't say that. Promise me, Sarah." She nodded, barely able to speak. He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "You've got light in you, the kind that makes others uncomfortable. Don't let them turn it off just because they can't stand the brightness." The monitor beeped softly. Then the silence between beeps stretched and stretched until it didn't come back. Sarah froze, holding his hand, her tears falling silently onto the sheets. She called his name, once, twice, again, but only the hum of the machine answered. She stayed that way until the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, still holding his hand, still promising. Back in the diner, Sarah blinked, and the memory faded into the soft reflection in the window. Her coffee had gone cold. The waitress returned quietly. "You okay, honey?" Sarah exhaled, her voice low. "Yeah, I just remembered why I don't quit." The waitress smiled gently. "That's a good reason." Sarah left a few bills on the table and stepped outside. The night air was cool and clean after the rain. She looked up. The clouds had parted, revealing a faint stretch of stars above the city skyline. And in that quiet moment, she could almost hear Daniel's voice again. Steady, kind, eternal. "Don't let the world make you hard." Sarah smiled through the tears that filled her eyes. "I didn't, Dan," she whispered. "I never did." She walked on, her reflection following her in the dark glass storefronts. Not the reflection of a broken woman, but of one reborn. One who had turned pain into promise and loss into light. And the next morning, the city was bathed in golden light. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long while, the air felt still, like the world itself was catching its breath. Sarah stood by her window holding a cup of coffee. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, humming softly as she drew on a piece of paper. The drawing was simple, a woman standing in front of a burning building, holding a small child by the hand. At the bottom, in uneven letters, she'd written, "My mum is brave." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She went to her daughter and kissed the top of her head. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Emily looked up and smiled. "It's you." Sarah laughed softly. "I thought it might be." For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a place of survival. It felt like home again. Later that day, Sarah returned to the mall for a follow-up meeting about the new safety system. She walked through the glass doors with quiet confidence. People greeted her now, not out of obligation, but with genuine warmth. Even those who had once whispered about her offered small smiles, nods, awkward apologies. Redemption, she realized, often comes in silence, in the looks people exchange when shame teaches them empathy. In Mark's office, 2 men in suits were waiting. One of them stood up as she entered. Tall, composed, in his 50s, wearing a dark grey tie, he extended his hand. "Ms. Miller, I'm James Whitmore, Corporate Director. I came from Chicago to personally thank you." Sarah hesitated before shaking his hand. "Thank me," he smiled, "for saving one of our employees, and for standing up for what's right when others didn't." Sarah blinked, uncertain whether this was genuine or just corporate damage control. But Whitmore's eyes were kind. He sat down again and continued, "Mr. Coleman's contract has been terminated, and after reviewing your file, the board unanimously agreed you should lead the new security division for our entire region." The words hung in the air. Sarah looked from him to Mark, stunned. "Lead the whole division?" Whitmore nodded. "You've proven yourself. We want systems built on integrity, not shortcuts, and you're the kind of person who makes that happen." For a moment she couldn't speak. The world seemed to narrow to a single heartbeat. Then she smiled, not with pride, but with quiet relief. "I'll do it," she said softly. Whitmore stood and extended his hand again. "Welcome aboard, Director Miller." Mark grinned. "Told you, Sarah. The truth has a long memory." That evening, as the sun dipped low over Dallas, Sarah stopped by Ben's cafe. The place was nearly empty, just a few regulars, the smell of cinnamon rolls, and the familiar sound of Ben's old country radio. "Look who's here," Ben said with a grin. "The woman who took on an empire and won." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Don't start." He poured her a cup of coffee anyway. "How does it feel?" She smiled faintly. "Strange. Good. Terrifying." "Sounds like living," Ben said, handing her the mug. She sat by the window, watching the evening traffic pass, the blur of lights, the hum of ordinary lives. She'd spent years fighting to prove her worth. Now, for the first time, she didn't have to. Ben wiped the counter with a rag and said quietly, "You know, you remind me of your husband." Sarah looked up, startled. "You knew Daniel. Met him once. He brought you coffee during a late shift here years ago. He said you never stopped until things were right." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "That sounds like him." Ben nodded. "Guess he was right." "Ow." As Sarah left the cafe, she saw a small group of employees from the mall gathered by the crosswalk. They waved at her, a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Among them was David, the janitor who'd once risked his job to help her. He stepped forward. "Ms. Miller, I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for all of us." Sarah smiled warmly. "No, David, thank you. You helped me when no one else would." He shrugged shyly. "I guess we all just needed someone to remind us what doing the right thing looks like." She nodded, her heart full. "Keep doing that. The world needs it more than cameras." They laughed softly. The traffic light changed, and Sarah crossed the street, the late afternoon sun glowing behind her. In her bag, she carried the new contract. But more than that, she carried something far heavier and far lighter at once. Faith in people again. A few weeks passed. Under Sarah's leadership, the new security and safety division took shape faster than anyone expected. Every store in the region began installing upgraded camera systems, new alert networks, and transparent protocols that even employees could access. The goal was simple: truth without walls. Sarah worked long hours, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. There was purpose in her exhaustion. Each click, each cable connected, each light that blinked green. It all meant something now. One afternoon, she stood in the new control center, a wall of monitors showing live feeds from multiple locations. Mark walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're gonna wear yourself out," he said, handing her one. She smiled. "That would be new." He chuckled. "They're already talking about expanding this model to the entire company. You've started something big." Sarah looked at the screens, images of people working, helping customers, laughing. "It's not about the cameras, Mark. It's about trust. But fate has a way of testing what we claim to believe." To that night, just as Sarah was about to leave, one of the monitors began to flash red. A system alert. "Store 214, downtown Fort Worth." She frowned. "That's one of ours." The alert read, "Lockdown triggered. Armed intrusion suspected." Mark looked over her shoulder. "Is this live?" "Yeah." She tapped a few keys, opening the feed. The image flickered, then stabilized. A convenience store lit by cold fluorescent light. 2 masked figures inside, one pointing a gun at the cashier. Sarah's pulse quickened. She zoomed in, checked the metadata. It was live, time-stamped seconds ago. "Call the police," she ordered. Mark grabbed his phone, but Sarah noticed something else. One of the figures hesitating, shaking. He wasn't an adult. He was a teenager. She switched to another camera angle, pulling from a nearby street cam. There, a getaway car idling by the curb. License plate visible. She snapped a screenshot and forwarded it to the authorities. Then she did something no one expected. She pressed a control on the console, rerouting the security audio feed to the police channel. For the first time, the new integrated system would be tested, live. Duddy Sane, the next 10 minutes unfolded like an eternity. On the screen, the young robber's hands were trembling. The older one yelled at him to grab the cash, but Sarah saw it, the hesitation, the fear. She zoomed in on his face. He couldn't have been more than 16. Mark's voice was low. "What are you doing?" "Watching," Sarah said. Her tone was calm, analytical. "He's not a killer. He's scared." Suddenly, the police sirens appeared in the distance. The robbers panicked. The older one ran to the door. The younger froze, paralyzed. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She switched to the store's internal intercom feed. "You're being watched," she said quietly into the mic, her voice calm but firm. Mark looked at her, shocked. "Sarah!" But she continued, speaking to the boy. "I can see you. You don't have to do this. Just put it down." The boy looked up at the camera, startled. His breathing quickened. "Who are you?" he shouted. Her voice came through the speaker again, steady as a heartbeat. "Someone who's been where you are. Someone who lost everything because of one bad choice. Don't make yours tonight." The older man yelled from outside. "Come on, let's go." The boy's hand shook violently. He looked at the camera again, eyes full of tears. And then he dropped the gun. Sarah exhaled sharply. Mark's shoulders sagged in relief. Through the monitor, they watched the police rush in, handcuffing both suspects without a single shot fired. The feed stabilized, the sirens faded. And for the first time since that terrible day months ago, Sarah smiled, not in pride, but in peace. She had used the same system that once destroyed her life to save someone else's. Hours later, after the reports were filed and the adrenaline faded, Mark found Sarah sitting alone in the control room. The monitors glowed softly around her, painting her face in light. He walked in quietly. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking about that boy." "You saved him." "Maybe. But I keep wondering, if someone had talked to me back then, really talked to me, maybe I wouldn't have fallen so far before I learned how to stand again." Mark sat beside her. "You're changing things, Sarah. Not just systems, people." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe all of this was worth it." He looked at her, eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You're proof that sometimes the broken ones build the safest places." Sarah leaned back, watching the screens fade to standby mode. One by one, each monitor turning black, until only her reflection remained. The reflection of a woman who had walked through fire, accusation and fear, and come out the other side carrying something far stronger than innocence: grace. Udaden. Thus the next morning, Dallas woke under heavy grey skies. The city seemed to have lost its colour, a silent echo after the storm. Sarah arrived at the office early, the building still half asleep, lights flickering on one floor at a time. For a moment she stood by the window of her new office, watching the traffic crawl below. A strange stillness lingered in her chest, the kind that comes after doing something brave, and realizing courage doesn't erase exhaustion. Mark entered carrying 2 coffees, but his expression was tight. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. Sarah turned. "What now?" He handed her a printed document, an internal memo stamped confidential. She scanned the first lines, then her heart dropped. "Unauthorized system access detected. Corporate investigation pending." Sarah looked up. "They're saying I breached protocol?" Mark nodded grimly. "Richard Coleman may be gone, but his allies aren't. Someone leaked footage of last night's incident. The standoff. It's all over the news." Sarah's pulse quickened. She crossed to the monitor and turned on the local channel. A reporter stood in front of the convenience store speaking energetically. "Sources confirm that the store's intercom was hijacked remotely by a third-party operator, allegedly by Sarah Miller, head of security operations." The words blurred in her ears. Hijacked, unauthorized, reckless. Her knees weakened. She sat slowly, trying to breathe. "They're twisting it," she murmured. Mark clenched his fists. "They want to make you the problem again. Classic corporate move, turn the hero into the scapegoat." Sarah shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not again, Mark. I can't live this all over again." By noon, her email was full of legal notices. A formal hearing was scheduled. Her access to the security servers was suspended. In one day, she went from savior to liability. Whispers followed her again, the same rhythm of doubt she thought she'd buried forever. She walked through the corridor as co-workers avoided her eyes. The sting was familiar, but this time it cut deeper. Not because they doubted her, but because she'd allowed herself to hope they wouldn't. Mark caught up to her. "Sarah, don't disappear this time. We'll fight it." She stopped, her face pale. "You don't understand. I built everything to be transparent, to prove that truth matters, and now they're using that truth against me." He grabbed her shoulder gently. "You did what was right, and it still wasn't enough." That evening, she returned home late. Emily was already asleep, her drawings still taped to the refrigerator. Sarah stood there for a long time, staring at the words written in crayon. "My mom is brave." Her eyes filled with tears. She sat at the table, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. For the first time in years, she let the silence swallow her. No fight, no defense, just silence. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it, but it buzzed again and again. Finally, she reached for it, a message from Ben, the cafe owner. "Turn on Channel 8. Now." Sarah frowned, grabbed the remote, and turned on the TV. The same reporter was back on the screen, but this time she wasn't standing in front of the store. She was standing in front of City Hall. In an unexpected twist, new information reveals that Sarah Miller's actions may have prevented a fatal shooting last night. Police confirm her quick intervention allowed officers to disarm the suspects without violence. The footage changed, showing the moment the boy dropped the gun, his terrified eyes looking up at the camera. The voiceover continued, "Officials are reviewing her case, and public opinion has shifted in her favor. Citizens are calling her a hero." Sarah sat motionless, her lips parted, but no sound came. She watched as her own face appeared briefly on screen, tired, smoky, caught by one of the security feeds, and then the headline at the bottom of the screen, "The woman who saved him, not with a gun, but with her voice. She pressed a hand over her mouth, her body trembling with quiet relief. After everything, truth had found its way again. That night, she went to Emily's room. Her daughter stirred, half asleep. "Mom!" Sarah brushed her hair gently. "Yeah, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Did they stop being mean to you?" Sarah smiled softly. "Some of them did. Some are still learning." Emily murmured something incoherent and drifted back into dreams. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, tears slipping silently down her face. She whispered to herself, "You were right, Dan. The world tried to make me hard, but I stayed kind anyway." Outside, the wind moved through the trees. No applause, no headlines, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you've lost everything twice and still choose to love the world that broke you. Weeks passed. The investigation ended quietly, with an apology that came in the most corporate way possible. A short email signed, "Best regards, the board." No press release, no ceremony. But Sarah didn't care. She wasn't looking for recognition anymore. Something had changed inside her. Not a victory, not relief, but clarity. She realized that the truth didn't belong to any company or system. It belonged to people, to those who had the courage to live honestly, even when it cost them everything. And that's when she made her decision. Sarah resigned from her corporate position a month later. Mark tried to stop her. "You built all this. You can't just walk away." She smiled gently. "That's the point, Mark. It's built. It doesn't need me anymore." He sighed. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere people still think truth is a luxury." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You're not done changing lives, are you?" "Not even close." They hugged, the kind of hug that carries a story behind it. Two people who started as strangers and ended up as survivors of the same war. Months later, a small community center opened on the outskirts of Fort Worth. Its sign read, "The Miller Project, Rebuilding Lives Through Second Chances." Inside, the walls were lined with old security monitors, repaired, donated, and repurposed by Sarah herself. They weren't used for surveillance anymore, but for education. Each monitor played interviews, workshops, and recordings of people telling their stories. Stories of mistakes, redemption, and hope. Sarah taught classes there every week, not about technology, but about trust, about how to rebuild after being broken, about how to see yourself clearly again when the world tries to blur your reflection. Sometimes she'd look up and see young faces, scared, stubborn, searching, and she'd think of that boy from the robbery, the one she'd saved with her voice. He'd come by once, months later, to thank her in person. He was working now, studying at night. He told her, "You didn't just stop me, you saw me." And that, she thought, was the greatest success of her life. One evening, as the center was closing, Ben stopped by, still wearing his apron, carrying a paper bag that smelled of fresh pie. "Brought you something, Director," he said playfully. She smiled. "I told you, I'm not the director of anything anymore." He set the bag on her desk. "You sure about that? Looks to me like you're running something bigger than a company now." She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just trying to make sure no one else goes through what I did." Ben smiled knowingly. That's how real leaders start. They sat outside under the soft orange sky, eating pie out of paper plates. The streets were quiet, the air still warm from the Texas sun. Sarah leaned back and looked at the horizon. "You know, Ben, all this time I thought my story was about being humiliated, then vindicated." He looked at her. "And now? Now I think it was about learning how to forgive the world while still changing it." Ben nodded slowly. "That's not easy." "No," she said softly, "but it's worth it." That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah walked through the empty halls of the center. She stopped by one of the monitors looping an old recording, Daniel's voice, saved from a home video she'd kept all those years. He was laughing, telling a joke off-screen. Her younger self's laughter followed. She smiled at the flickering screen. "We did it, Dan," she whispered. "We kept the light on." Then she turned off the lights and stepped outside. The moon hung low over Fort Worth, bathing the street in soft silver. Sarah locked the door, slipped the key into her pocket, and walked away slowly, not toward the past, but toward the peace she'd earned. It started quietly, like most miracles do. A local journalist, one of the few who had followed Sarah's case since the beginning, wrote an article titled, "The Woman Who Chose Integrity Over Revenge." At first, it circulated modestly. A few shares, a handful of comments. But something about it resonated. Within days, it spread beyond Texas. People across the country began reading about the woman who had been framed, humiliated, and still found the strength to forgive. Then came the interviews. Then the invitations. Soon Sarah was standing on a stage under bright lights, not as a victim, not as a whistleblower, but as a voice of quiet courage. Conference Hall, Chicago, 1,000 people sat in silence, waiting. Behind the curtain, Sarah took a deep breath. Her palms were cold, but her heart was steady. Mark was there, smiling reassuringly from the front row. She stepped onto the stage. The applause was soft at first, then grew. Sarah looked out at the crowd, faces of all ages, some nodding, some crying quietly. When the room fell silent again, she began, "I spent years trying to clear my name. I thought redemption was something the world had to give me. But I learned that forgiveness, real forgiveness, starts when you stop waiting for the world to be fair." Her voice was calm, full of the same quiet strength that had carried her through fire and humiliation. "I used to think truth was fragile, something you had to protect. But truth doesn't need protection, it just needs patience. It always finds its way through the noise." A hush settled over the hall. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That's her, the woman from the cameras." Sarah smiled faintly. "The cameras used to scare me. They saw everything, even the moments I wanted to erase. But now I understand. The cameras didn't destroy me. They saved me, because they forced me to face who I really was, not what the world said I was." She paused. "When they humiliated me, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I lost was only the illusion of control. What I gained was freedom. The freedom to start again, to help others do the same." Applause rippled through the audience, not loud, but heavy with emotion. She glanced down for a moment, gathering herself, then looked back up with a soft smile. Maybe life isn't about proving people wrong. Maybe it's about proving yourself right, quietly, humbly, one choice at a time. After the speech, dozens of people came to her, strangers who felt seen. A young woman with trembling hands whispered, "They ruined my name at work too. I thought my life was over." Sarah took her hand and said, "It's not over. You're just in the part where the story hurts." An older man, a veteran, said quietly, "You reminded me why I believed in good people." Sarah smiled. "Good people don't disappear. Sometimes they just get tired." Within months, the Miller Project grew into a network. Free workshops across several states teaching ethics, emotional recovery, and employment for people rebuilding their reputations. The donations came from everywhere. Small towns, big cities, anonymous envelopes with simple notes like, "For the woman who made me believe again." One morning, Sarah arrived at the center to find dozens of volunteers waiting. New faces, full of hope. Mark was there too, holding a box of equipment. "You really thought you were done?" he joked. She laughed. Apparently, destiny had other plans. He set the box down and looked at her. "You're not fixing cameras anymore, Sarah. You're fixing people." She smiled softly. "No, Mark, they're fixing themselves. I just gave them a place to start." Months later, a national magazine published her story under a single word, light. It showed a photo of Sarah standing in front of her center, a faint smile on her lips, sunlight catching her hair. The caption read, "She was accused, humiliated, and forgotten until she decided to forgive." That image traveled the world. But to Sarah, it was never about fame. It was about the quiet faces who walked through her door, broken but willing. Each one reminded her of who she used to be, and who she had chosen to become. That night, as she closed the center and turned off the last light, She whispered the same words she once told that frightened boy through a security feed. "You don't have to do this. You can start again." And somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard Daniel's voice, soft, proud, eternal. "You kept the light on," she smiled, because this time she finally believed it. 5 years later, the Miller Project had grown far beyond what anyone imagined. What started as a single classroom in Fort Worth had turned into a network of 13 centers across the country. Each one carried the same simple motto, printed above its doors: "Truth builds, kindness restores." The story of Sarah Miller had become something larger than a headline. It had become a compass. Her image no longer appeared on magazine covers. She didn't give interviews or seek the spotlight. She preferred the background, fixing a broken light here, mentoring a volunteer there, listening more than speaking. But her presence was everywhere. In every center, every hallway, every face that walked through the door carrying shame, doubt, or guilt, Sarah's voice lived on in the form of those she had helped. Fort Worth, Texas, a late afternoon. A young woman stood in front of the center's wall of photos, pictures of people who had graduated from the program. Her name was Maya, 24 years old, eyes full of exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Next to her stood one of the volunteers, a man in his early 20s, the same boy Sarah had once saved through the camera. Now he was the head of youth outreach. Maya asked softly, "Did she really forgive the people who hurt her?" The young man smiled faintly. "She didn't forgive because they deserved it. She forgave because she deserved peace." Maya nodded slowly. "Do you think I can start over too?" He looked at her kindly. "That's exactly why this place exists." He pointed at a framed quote on the wall. Sarah's handwriting, faded but clear. "The world doesn't break you. It shows you where you still need to heal." Maya stared at it for a long moment, and something shifted inside her, the beginning of hope. "This disease considered elsewhere." Dallas corporate headquarters. Mark stood in a boardroom years older, hair silvered at the temples. On the large screen behind him glowed a presentation. The Miller model, ethical security and human oversight. Executives from across the country filled the room. Mark spoke with calm authority. "This isn't just about cameras. It's about accountability. We learned from one woman's courage that systems without compassion destroy themselves." A younger manager raised his hand. "Did you ever meet her?" Mark smiled quietly. "Every day, in every decision I make." Meanwhile, at the original Fort Worth Center, Sarah sat alone in her small office. The sun poured through the window, catching the dust motes in the air. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her eyes still carried the same soft fire. She looked over the list of names for the next day's class. New stories, new beginnings, a knock on the door. It was Emily, now a teenager, taller, confident, her father's gentle eyes shining in her smile. "Mom, you ready? They're waiting for you." Sarah stood, adjusting her bracelet, the same one Daniel had given her years ago. "Coming." Before leaving, she looked once more at a framed photo on the shelf. Her, Daniel, and baby Emily. A younger version of herself smiled back. She whispered, "We made it, Dan. We really made it." And that evening, she walked onto the small stage in the community hall. Dozens of people filled the seats, students, families, volunteers. When they saw her, they clapped softly but sincerely. She raised her hand. "Thank you, but tonight isn't about me. It's about you, all of you who decided your past wasn't going to be the final word." She paused, scanning the room. The lights reflected in her eyes. "Some of you came here scared, some angry, some broken. But look at you now. You're here, standing where you once fell. That's courage. That's truth." The audience was silent, moved. Sarah smiled gently. "The world humiliated me once. It tried to erase me. But I learned something they never understood. When you know your worth, no one can take it away." Lee. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Sarah stepped outside. The Texas sky was wide and full of stars. The wind carried the distant sounds of laughter from the people she had helped, the living proof of her legacy. She sat on a bench outside the center, breathing deeply. Emily joined her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, yeah? Do you ever miss the old days before all this?" Sarah thought for a moment. "No," she said softly. "The old days built me. But these are the days that set me free." They sat in silence, watching the stars. A shooting star crossed the horizon. Emily pointed. "Make a wish." Sarah smiled faintly. "I already got mine." The night settled around them, quiet, endless, and full of peace. And somewhere in that silence, between heartbeats and wind, Sarah's story kept moving forward, not through fame or noise, but through every soul she had quietly helped heal. Years later, early morning, Fort Worth. The first light of dawn spilled softly through the wide windows of the community center. Dust floated in golden rays, drifting lazily through the quiet hall. The building had changed, larger now, brighter, but the heart of it remained the same. At the far end of the hall sat Sarah Miller, older, serene, a cup of tea warming her hands. Outside, children played, their laughter echoing faintly through the glass. The walls around her were filled with photographs, hundreds of them, each one a story, a life rebuilt. She rose slowly and walked along the gallery. Her fingers traced the frames as she passed, faces of people she'd once met in pain, now smiling. Some she remembered by name, others she didn't need to. Their eyes told her everything. She stopped in front of one photo, a young man in a volunteer t-shirt, his arm around a girl with bright eyes. It was the boy she had once saved through the security feed, now a father himself. Below the photo, a small brass plaque read, "Forgiveness saved 2 lives, his and hers." Sarah smiled, tears filling her eyes. So much had happened since those days. The accusation, the fire, the fear, the rise. But it all felt distant now, like a movie she had once watched and quietly learned from. She walked outside into the sunlight. The garden behind the center had grown wild and beautiful, a tangle of color and life. She sat on her favorite bench beneath the old oak tree, the same one she'd planted when the first center opened. Its roots were deep now. Its shadow stretched far. From her purse, she pulled a folded piece of paper, yellowed, soft from age. It was the note Daniel had once left for her, back when the world still felt heavy. The ink had faded, but she knew every word by heart. If life breaks you, let it, because that's how light finds a way in. She closed her eyes. The wind moved gently through her hair. Birds sang in the distance, and for the first time she felt that sentence not as comfort, but as truth. A voice, narration. There are stories that end with applause, others with silence, but the best ones, the ones that matter, end with peace. Sarah opened her eyes again, looking at the horizon. The morning sun bathed everything in soft gold. The laughter of children mingled with the rustle of leaves. The world kept moving, loud, unpredictable, imperfect, and yet somehow beautiful. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Truth doesn't need to shout, it just waits for us to listen." Later, that day, Emily, now grown and radiant, approached from behind. "Mom, everyone's waiting inside." Sarah turned, smiling. "For what?" "For you. They're naming the new center after you." Sarah chuckled softly. "I told them not to." "Too late," Emily said, laughing. "You're kind of hard to forget." They walked back toward the building arm in arm. As they entered, the crowd erupted in applause, quiet, heartfelt, genuine. On the wall behind the podium hung a simple plaque, "The Sarah Miller Foundation, for Truth, Kindness, and Second Chances." Sarah looked at the faces, familiar and new, young and old, all of them glowing with life. She didn't speak at first. She just took it in. Then finally she said, "I once thought destiny was something that happened to us, but now I know destiny is what we build, one act of courage at a time." The applause swelled again, filling the hall. But for Sarah, the sound faded into something softer, like a heartbeat, like home. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, she stood by the door, locking it for the last time that day. She paused, looking out at the fading sky. The colors melted, gold to rose, rose to dusk. She smiled to herself and whispered the final words of her story. Every humiliation was just a doorway, every wound a beginning, and every truth a light that refused to die. She turned off the last light, and the frame faded to black. Share this story with someone who needs hope today.